My name is Steve Holloway, and I'm a professional musician here in Brooklyn, New York. A couple years ago, a 2-month tour that I was booked on was canceled at the last minute. I found myself with a lot of free time on my hands. I wondered if there might be some interesting short-term, part-time gig that I could find. So I looked on Craigslist, and I saw this ad that said, "Do you love cats?" And I thought, sure. The truth is, I did like cats a lot. I haven't had one in decades, but we always had cats when I was growing up, and I always felt that I understood them. The ad was from a Manhattan cat-sitting service, and the job was essentially going into people's apartments and looking in on their furry friends while they were away. Though I had only planned on doing this for 5 or 6 weeks, I found the experience so interesting I kept it going part-time for several months. What I discovered was the secret lives of New York cats and the people they live with. Just like people, there are rich cats and poor cats, uptown cats and downtown cats. In New York City, there are cats who are the primary residents of multi-million-dollar townhouses that are owned by their absentee humans. All these cats have a story to tell, but in a bigger sense, I got an insight into how people live and how their animals fit into their lives. I was given free access into over 80 New York City apartments, from East Harlem to Battery Park City, and can offer a glimpse into the private lives of New York cats. Arcenio and Bo were 2 cats that lived in a fancy new apartment overlooking the Hudson River and the West Side Highway. The views were amazing, although in the winter, the cold wind off the river was brutal. Now, these 2 cats totally had the run of this place. Their owners were European and were gone a lot. Arcenio was a young, furry Maine Coon, only about a year old, was very friendly, and he always looked like he was smiling and happy as can be. His older brother, Bo, was 15 years old. A very beautiful cat, but he basically hung out under the bed or on a footstool and used an expensive Persian rug for his litter box. Some of the other sitters felt like Arcenio bullied Bo, and maybe he did, but hey, he was a 20-pound kitten. I always liked hanging out with him. All in all, visiting these 2 cool cats in this modern, opulent apartment was pretty fun. I can say I've rubbed paws with the feline 1%. If there was one cat I would call my favorite, it was Moki Gillespie. He was a big guy, heavy but lean and muscular, with sad, soulful eyes. He kind of reminded me of the cats drawn by Bernard Kleiben back in the 70s. Moki lived in a huge, sprawling apartment farther uptown on the west side in an older building. This place must have had 4 or 5 bedrooms. There were entire areas of the apartment that neither Moki or I ever ventured into. Still, he had the run of several rooms. He loved to play, and we would run all over the apartment playing string. But he was also one of the most loving animals I've ever come across. He'd always greet me at the door, and he would always wait until after I left to start eating. There was an old leather armchair in the dining room, and as soon as I sat down, he would be on my lap, purring away. He would even sometimes fall asleep there for a while. The owners had another house in California, so this giant apartment was pretty much all Moki's, except for those times when one of his humans were in town. Once when I went up to see him, the old armchair was gone, and several boxes had appeared. It was clear that Moki was moving, and it made me sad to think I'd never see him again. He wasn't just my favorite cat. All the other cat sitters that knew him adored him, and we all disliked the fact that such a friendly cat had to spend so much time alone. We were relieved to discover that the owners had sold the apartment, not needing so much space, and bought a 2-bedroom penthouse about 30 blocks downtown. On my first visit to the new place, I imagined Moki meeting me at the door, showing me where the cat bowls and litter box were, and then getting into a nice game of string. But to my dismay, there was a new policy for the new apartment. Out of some concern for the furniture, Moki was to be kept locked up in the spare bedroom. Now that just didn't seem right. Such a proud, regal animal becoming a cat in a gilded cage. Sure, to any street cat or alley cat, these digs might have seemed pretty great, and he did at least have a window to look out of. But it's hard to imagine being locked in a bedroom for 23.5 hours a day, especially after he'd spent most of his life in this nice, spacious apartment. He was so relieved to get out of that bedroom. He was always very happy to see me and the other sitters, I'm sure, but something had changed about him. He wasn't as playful as he used to be. He still couldn't get enough petting and purring. I felt I was at least bringing him some happiness, as short-lived as it was. And of course, it was good for me too. There are plenty of scientific studies that show that petting cats lowers a person's blood pressure, for example. There seemed to be an exchange of more genuine affection, though. We really made each other happy. But back in the spare bedroom, we both knew it was inevitable that I had to go. I usually stayed longer than I was supposed to, but I had other cats to feed. Cats may have a different sense of time than people. I could only hope that he'd sleep through a good bit of the next 23 hours. He's one cat I still think about years later, and I hope that he grew used to his new surroundings. I couldn't help but feel that he changed my life in a way, and there was something unusually important about our time together. Downtown in Tribeca, the most expensive and fashionable area of Manhattan, home to dozens of movie stars and celebrities, lived two purebred cats named Sammy and Fred. They lived with their humans in a stunningly beautiful loft apartment. I did meet the owners once, and they were very nice, a good-looking power couple who really loved their cats a lot. Now, these two young felines were British Shorthairs, which are some of the most expensive cats in the world, so their pedigree certainly suited their environment. This is one of those places I would have happily moved into if the owners had asked me. And it's the only apartment I've ever seen that had its own golf driving range. It's also worth noting that this couple, like many of the people who used our cat service, were amateur musicians. I never mentioned to anyone that I was a professional musician, but I was surprised at how many people had instruments in their homes. I really enjoyed hanging out with these two. Their naturally large eyes made it look like they were surprised or awestruck. They had unusually soft fur and tended to be pretty fun and goofy. They were very curious and liked to interact with humans. And since this apartment went on and on, they had plenty of room to move. Regardless of the cats or the apartments, the primary job of a cat sitter is to pet them, feed them, and scoop them. But some places were easier than others, and this place was the best. There was a kitchen island that had its own sink, and all the cat supplies were kept in the cupboards below. And the scooping was equally convenient. This was also the only apartment that had its own rubbish chute, conveniently located next to the cat boxes. British Shorthairs aren't known to be particularly acrobatic, but these two were young and they had plenty of energy. So after they had a bite to eat, they were usually ready for playtime. Regardless of breed or pedigree, most cats just can't resist a piece of string on a stick. I remember how dizzy-making that game is. Between the beautiful, immaculate apartment and the good nature of these cats, I was always happy to visit here. Since the owner also asked us to come twice a day and send texts with photos after each visit, I ended up with a lot of pictures of these photogenic kitties. Unlike some places, though, I never felt bad about leaving. These two cats were living the good life. They had each other, a big place to roam freely with no limits, and humans that wanted nothing but the best for them. So to contrast such a luxurious, opulent cat visit, I take you now to Manhattan's Lower East Side. Like most of New York City, this neighborhood has changed a lot in recent years. From the renovated Delancey Street subway station to the high-end restaurants, nightclubs, hotels, and high-rise apartments. But lest you think the funky old downtown is dead and gone, I introduce you to Coco the cat.
Hey, puss.
She's in the shot, but not easy to spot for some reason.
Meow.
Coco lives in this tiny apartment with 2 adults and a small child in what looks like a museum, a motorcycle repair shop, or maybe a piece of performance art. Not unlike most cats who are left alone 24 hours at a time, Coco just wants to be petted and interacted with. She's about as sweet a cat as you'll find, but this environment was pretty challenging to cope with. For one thing, this was the middle of August. There was no air conditioning in this place. I found it hard to be there. I can't imagine what it was like for her with her permanent fur coat. I did finally find a fan in the closet. It was so covered with dust it barely put out any breeze at all. But I tried to clean it up and I left it on for her 24/7. All I really had to do here was water the plants, refill the cat feeder with dry food, and scoop the box. I tried to do all that as quickly as possible. Coco was an old puss, didn't really have any interest in playing. This apartment was so small she couldn't run far anyway. She laid there on what I guess were her human's tatami mats and her paisley tie-dyed blanket. She purred the entire time I was there. I stayed as long as I could stand the heat and tried to make her day a little happier. Ah, see? More musicians. But that apartment wasn't the most bizarre place I ever visited. I was asked to feed another cat, also on the Lower East Side, and this place made Coco's apartment look like a happy, sunny funhouse. It was only a 2-day job, happily, but I did have to meet the client beforehand in her office to get the keys. So I waited for a while in this lobby of a building in Midtown, and eventually a well-dressed, pleasant businesswoman came out of the office area, and we chatted a bit. And it was clear that she had a pretty important job, like an executive position in this company. She gave me the keys to her apartment and mentioned that I wouldn't see the cat, which was pretty odd. I'd never visited an invisible cat before. But nothing could quite prepare me for what I was about to see. Oh, man. Wow. God, now, I've seen some messy apartments in my time. I've seen some dirty apartments too, but this place was in a league of its own. Here, kitty, kitty. I couldn't speculate on why this place was like it was. I'd just be guessing. I don't know these people at all. But most likely that nice woman I met in the office building had a private life that few of her business colleagues knew about. Well, there was some evidence that a cat lived in this place. There were cat dishes in the kitchen. And after climbing over some piles, I found a cat box in the bathroom. Wow, this is like train spotting. Bon appetit. But just like she said, I never saw or heard from the cat, who I guess was either under the bed or under one of these piles. Here, kitty. When I told my girlfriend about this place, she implored me to never go back. But I did return the next day, and the cat food that I had left out the day before was gone. This apartment was a complete non sequitur from the woman's office environment. It seemed like every piece of clothing she owned was in a pile. Apparently, the secret to her sharp business attire was this industrial-sized wardrobe steamer. But to her credit, one other point about this particular job is worth mentioning. Unlike many of the rich, wealthy clients I worked for week after week, this woman left me a cash tip and a note inviting me to help myself to a beer. And when I looked in a refrigerator, it was filled with nothing but beer. This adventure in cat sitting was again offering me a view into other people's lives I never expected. Some cats are weirder than others, to be fair, but I wouldn't call any of these cats crazy. However, I've concluded that a cat's owner's neuroses can start to affect their cats as well. Now, feeding a cat is a pretty straightforward process. For 95% of the visits I did, the basic procedure was put food in a bowl, put the bowl on the floor, let the cat eat. Emma and Sophie lived in a nice apartment on 5th Avenue. They were beautiful, fairly normal cats, but the owners were convinced that they had eating disorders. They said they vomited all the time, they thought one was overweight, but the other one was underweight and needed fattening up. And the feeding instructions they gave me were considerably more complicated than normal. You'd think these were the highest maintenance cats on the planet. But the thing is, despite these crazy instructions, I fed these cats. There was never a problem. I always try to respect the wishes of the owners, but in the end, I put food in the bowls and the cats ate it. They never threw up. I didn't have to trick them or scare them, and they never fussed. I wondered if they behaved differently when their people were away. And I was called out once for not leaving exactly 3.5 inches of litter in the cat box. He actually had a measuring stick he wanted me to use each time to get the level exactly right. Right. Another couple I worked for had a tiny little cat that they were so certain was overweight, they had him on what I considered a starvation diet. In order to control his intake, they had me put a small amount of food in a timer and then come every other day to refill it. Each time I arrived, the cat was famished and freaking out. This cat was obsessed with eating and was probably hungry most of the time. The first thing I usually did when I got there was give him something to nosh on, which he typically went through in seconds flat. It was clear that he spent most of his day and night sitting next to the feeder waiting for it to open or physically attempting to break into it thinking there might be more food inside. After this cat had some food in him, he certainly wanted to play. But it usually wasn't long before he wandered back and sat down by the cat feeder. People seem to project their own worldview on their pets. I took care of a very fun, intelligent, high-fiving cat at Greenwich Village whose owner decided he wanted his cat to use the toilet instead of a cat box. Now, Brian the cat could certainly use the toilet if he wanted, and he did pee in it. But every day I visited, he'd done his business on the bathroom floor. Cats just like to scratch and bury. It's an instinct that's gone on for approximately 10 million years. In a pre-war, one-bedroom apartment on the west side lived a sweet old cat named Boo. He was about 18 years old and clearly in his twilight years. That in itself was normal enough, but what made the situation heartbreaking was that Boo's human A woman in her early 30s was struggling to stay alive in a cancer ward. Despite his old age, Boo was always happy to see me, and he got out of his bed whenever I arrived. We diluted his food to make it easier for him to eat. He needed oral medication every day, and while it must have tasted terrible, he took it like a champ. I think mainly he did that because he loved his reward of cat treats. I found it funny that we had to mush up his food, but he had no trouble gobbling up dessert. Since his owner was in the hospital most of the time, Boo was a long-term client. For me, cat sitting was just an interesting experience and a part-time job. There were some other cat sitters who were remarkably dedicated to these animals. One person in particular, a woman named Isabel, loved this cat so much she'd come back to this apartment after her other visits, totally off the clock, and would spend hours just petting him and keeping him company. She cared for him so much. She'd take him to the vet, she'd buy his food, his litter, his meds. This was a case of someone's job becoming a personal mission. And I salute the passion and dedication of some of my fellow cat sitters. Another sweet old cat who was in his 9th life when I met him was Sagebrush. He lived in a nice modern apartment with a balcony which he loved to sit out on. Sage had recently been diagnosed as diabetic and needed an insulin shot every day. I found it nerve-wracking to administer insulin. It was one of the first signs that I wasn't quite cut out for this job. Just like Boo, Sage was always friendly and cooperative, and also loved his cat treats. I'm glad I got to spend some time with him.
Hi, Busty. That's a good pussy. You gotta be in my movie.
Emergency vet visits were another part of the job. I got a call late one evening that Bo, the older cat you met earlier, had taken a turn for the worse and needed to get to the vet first thing the next morning.
Check on your birthday. What you doing? Hey, baby. Oh. How you doing, buddy? Not too good, I don't think. We're gonna go for a ride if I can find your cat carrier. Everyone's a musician, which is cool. Alright, buddy. I know you're not gonna like this. We're going to the vet. You're such a good kitty. You're such a good kitty. I know you don't want to go, but you're gonna. Come here. Oh. Come here, buddy. Oh, I know. Let's get your tail in. Maybe you should stay in. Maybe you should stay. Maybe the kitty should stay in the thing. Yes, let's stay. They have an opening. Goofball. Alright, I have to leave you. You're a good kitty. You behave. Liking this one bit. No. Hi, good morning. Hi, I'm good. I just wanted to let you know, if you didn't know already, that I'm on my way in. I guess so. I just know I was supposed to take him to you, so I just want to let you know we're in the cab. We'll be there soon. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
There was another cat who had had radioactive iodine treatment, which made the litter box radioactive for a month. And there was a cat that needed to be given an inhaler every day. There are plenty of cats who needed pills, and anyone who's ever pilled a cat knows how much fun that is. What really became the most difficult part of the job for me wasn't the cats, of course. It was everything surrounding the cats. I was getting 10 to 15 emails every day, had to keep track of dozens of sets of keys. There were piles of instructions. I had to schedule meetings with clients and other sitters, do paperwork. There were never-ending text messages. It really became too much. The winter was particularly brutal. And in addition to the frigid cold from the polar vortex that year, for some reason the New York City subway system just seemed to barely work. So getting uptown and across town sometimes took twice as long as it should have. My interesting adventure in cat sitting became too much of a burden on my life and my music career. It was time to let it go. But it was an unforgettable experience. And anyone who thinks that cats are aloof or distant or incapable of showing affection haven't spent much time with them. Or maybe their allurophobia causes their interactions with cats to be less than pleasant. Out of the almost 100 cats I took care of during my brief stint as a cat sitter, most of them were friendly, happy, and very playful. And some of them were angel cats, as affectionate a companion as you could ever hope to find. Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.